Hello, everyone. Welcome to another wonderful panel for Poetry Festival Singapore this year. I am so honored to have with me three wonderful poets. They are Aaron, Crispin, and Jolyn, and we are here to talk about surviving as poets, right? And being true to our own identity and art in this very interesting time in the world, that of wokeness, right? So the question we want to ask people are like, what does wokeness mean for contemporary poets like ourselves? How has woke culture itself evolved over time? And, for the author, if we are moved to understand ideas of identity, history, ethics, and agency, yet wanting to always be free in our art making, what kinds of opportunities or challenges do the culture of these times pose for us? Okay, so very quickly, I'm going to introduce our eminent writers. Aaron Lee Soon Yong is a prize-winning poet, writing mentor, community organizer, and regulatory ethics lawyer. He has authored 3 poetry collections, the latest of which is Coastlands from Ethos Books. He has co-edited several poetry anthologies, including the best-selling No Other City, the Ethos Anthology of Urban Poetry in 2000, and Line Spark Code in 2017, which is a Singapore poetry anthology that's being studied at the A levels. Aaron's work has been published internationally and performed at festivals and conferences all over the world. And in 2014, he and his wife, the national artist Namiko, founded the Laniakir Culture Collective, an interdisciplinary, intercultural art practice. Now, that Hawaiian word actually means immeasurable heaven, right? So it's a very beautiful word in Hawaiian. Okay, next we have Crispin Rodriguez. He is the author of 3 collections of poetry: Pantomime, The Nomad Principle, and How Now Blown Crow, as well as co-editor of Crazy Little Pyromaniacs, an anthology of poetry by Singapore poets 35 years and below. He has also dabbled in multimedia forms of literary work, such as a poetry tour of his hometown of Yishun here in Singapore, and he's currently working on his 4th collection, and an Wuxia novel. And finally, we have Jolyn Tan, who writes in a variety of forms and styles and is particularly interested in poetry and nonfiction. Her first 2 poetry collections, Bursting Seams and Derivative Faith, are published by Math Paper Press and take on conversations surrounding body image and faith. Much of her writing also addresses the immensely personal questions of memory and the body. Jolyn's work can be found in anthologies such as Body Boundaries, the Singapore Anthology, Balik Kampung 3B, an Epigram Books collection of best new Singaporean short stories, the 3rd edition, and that's very hard to do, to get in. She has also moderated and spoken on various panels at Singapore Writers Festival, ranging from topics about social media and romance novels to spoken poetry readings. Okay, so we're just going to open this up and have this very sort of chill and nice discussion amongst our 3 wonderful distinguished poets. And my first question to each of them was, tell us a bit about your own projects, right? And what identity issues and concerns are important in your oeuvre of work so far, okay? So why don't we start from Jolyn, okay? We'll go backwards this time.
Hi. It's very nice to be here with all of you today. And just, I guess, to dive right into the question, I've always been writing about issues of the body. Started when I was a young girl, really, at about 17 or 18, and I realized that I wanted to talk about fat bodies in relation to my fat body in particular. That has sort of evolved around the years, and the thematics of that have shifted a bit from talking about how much I hate my body to actually now how I feel pleasure in my body, because I think it's very important to talk about experiencing pleasure as a woman who's maybe not considered conventionally slim or attractive. At least that was the rhetoric when I was growing up. It's very much different now, thankfully. But I still think these things are important to address. How you feel pleasure in a body that might not always be considered the standard of beauty and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's where I am with the current stuff that I'm working on that's still unpublished.
Thank you so much. Crispin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Desmond, for having me, and so nice to be here. I think when I first started writing, it was very much social commentary. But I think really like my recent work focuses on cultural representation of the Eurasian identity, and I think more specifically mixed race identity, because I do in some part identify as Eurasian, but in some part of me I do identify as Chinese as well. So I do think hybridity is something that I'm very interested in, as well as thinking about the colonization project that, I guess as a Eurasian I'm a product of that. So I'm quite fascinated by that. I'm currently working on a collection of poems that deals with that, as well as multilingualism. So there's a lot of it plays around with multiple languages. So that's what I'm really doing at this particular moment.
Exciting stuff. Okay, we're gonna hear from Aaron, lawyer in the house.
Hi everyone, such a pleasure to be with you this Saturday afternoon. I'll just really share quickly a little bit about personal background about my journey as a writer, one that began in my early teens and has lasted maybe 3 decades and on. I think the theme of my journey, as I have imperfectly discerned it, is the practice of poetry as a rehumanizing art. You might know me primarily as a poet, although I have written many more words in prose. I'm a lifelong keeper of a diary. I've journaled more than 1 million words to date. That's by my count. When I started creative writing in my early teens, I wrote short fiction and limericks, and then but I quickly came to, I think, enjoy the form-specific challenges posed by poetry, and then the sense of heightened emotion and revelation that comes from, writing a good poem or even reading a good poem. And so I sort of write as a way to make a sense of the world and of my life experiences. I grew up in an English-speaking family. English language is my mother tongue. We can thank our colonial fathers for that, and I think as I was kind of emerging into the literary scene in the late 90s, together with other peers like Alvin Pang, Alfian Sa'at, Felix Cheong, Cyril Wong, a little bit later, the post-colonial literary theory kind of angle was something that was pretty hot, and thanks to mentors, like Prof. Edwin Tambu and others, that was really kind of the predominant lens for us to kind of develop a voice and to kind of explore and to express our journey. Since then, it's actually become that sort of has fallen by the wayside for me. I've kind of come to explore interculturality a lot more, as well as interdisciplinary art expressions, and that's really the kind of the mission of the art practice that my wife Namiko and I co-founded about 8 years ago. And it's an ongoing project. We're exploring identity and expressions and language of the Pacific Islands people. My wife Namiko is a mixed heritage. Her mom's Japanese, her dad's Peranakan, and also on her dad's side, there's Sea Gypsy blood as well. And for myself, being Malaysian, born in Malaysia, having also being able to trace my lineage to other parts of Malaysia and also Indonesia, it's been very rich field for us to kind of mine. And I think we're primarily interested in sort of what we have in common with one another in that great ocean that sort of connects us, the Great Pacific Ocean, and less about what sets us apart and makes us different.
Wow. That's nice. So that already helps us segue into ideas of how we deal with the politics of culture and the making of the self and communities, right? So that's very interesting about looking for commonness. How do you speak to that? Say, Jolyn, say a common human experience, for example, especially with the kinds of perhaps topics that are important to you, Jolyn, as a writer?
Just to clarify, the question is, how do I speak to commonness or commonality?
Or difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Excuse me. It's a very interesting question. How do we sort of grapple with commonalities and differences, especially in the kind of writing that I do? I think for the most part, a lot of my writing, just to contextualize my answer, has been very confessional and extremely personal. So earlier on in my bio, you kind of read a bit that I'm interested in questions of memory and the body, how we form memory, how we document memory. I think these questions arose out of also very personal experiences. I was wondering at a lot of points in my life, if I was the only one to remember a specific experience that I shared with somebody else, then did that mean that the experience only existed to me? And that form of myself only existed to me because only I remembered it and only I was able to document it. If the other person had chosen to forget and sort of move on from the experience. And all this is important, I think, in framing the way I'm answering this question, because it's a very specific sort of answer that I'm formulating. I think about differences and commonalities with other people in relation to the effects they have on relationships, and the effects they have on our memory and the way we remember what went on or what we experienced within communities or within relationships with others. Which is to say that on a larger scale, when we come to talk about systemic differences, maybe between race, between gender, between how we experience sexualities, between different groups of people, I think that's a larger conversation that I don't tend to write about so much, as it doesn't show up in my personal writing, but it definitely has informed a lot of the way that I navigate or have grown up in arts communities and spaces over the past few years, because I did enter the arts community when I was sort of about 18, 19-ish, and so have been parts of, I guess, different activities within the communities over the past 10 years. I'm 28, 29 this year. And I think although these themes have not showed up so much in my writing, because I generally try to tend to write closer to what I'm experiencing and what hurts at the moment, for lack of a better way to put it, they have informed the way I interact and the way I learn from the community. So there's been a lot of recognizing that differences are, I mean, nobody's saying here that differences are a bad thing, but I think growing up, I had to learn that I wanted to be aware of these differences, that it was important to me to pay attention to what people who might have different experiences from me were saying. It was important to me also to learn what spaces were not about me. And that was very, very, very important for me to learn about and to engage with as an idea, because I really wanted to be able to learn from the experiences of people who are experiencing different things and saying different things and telling different stories. Yeah, so I think it's been important in so much as it's important for the things that I learn from my community and the ways I learn to interact with people and care for people and the ways I've learned to build relationships in the community. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's a fabulous responses from everyone. You know, it becomes such a gracious community when we see commonness as well as difference, right? We just learn from each other all the time. So Crispin, let's hear from you. So there are larger issues here that are being discussed, personal history in tandem with the kind of a history of communities, of larger culture and meta-narratives, right? So Crispin, how do you, as an academic, how will you help us with all that, the different histories that we encounter?
I think one thing that's very fascinating is that I think maybe because I graduated with a degree in literature, is to go and look at, is there any kind of representation in the literary works of someone like me? And I found it very difficult, actually. I think the closest I ever got, in terms of fiction, was to someone like Rex Shelley, who was writing about the Eurasian community, in the 50s and the 60s. And I guess in poetry, the closest representation I ever really got in those days, and I think this is about 10 to 15 years ago, was Professor Edwin Tambu, who's mixed. But other than that, there was very little work, literary work dealing with racial representation. All the more so that race is a hot button topic. I mean, it's one of those things in Singapore where, if you write something wrong, you could get someone could knock on your door in the middle of the night. So it's one of those things where it was quite a testy issue to talk about, but at the same time, you wanted to find a representation of yourself. So I think the one way I tried to do it was to write myself into representation, that kind of like write kind of representation of myself. And so that's where I started my own endeavor in writing. And I think over the years, it sort of shifted from the notion of, okay, I want to explore this Eurasian part of myself. But then, that wasn't also the authentic part of myself because I was mixed, and there's a difference in that. And so that shift from looking at the minority perspective to looking at the liminal spaces between race, and I found that more fascinating, I think, as I grew older, because I felt that sometimes the problems that someone who's mixed race is different from the ones, even if you belong to a particular minority. So that was something that I was particularly fascinated about. And so I think the poetics, my poetics changed over time because I was very fascinated with zooming in more on my own representation of myself, So so that's how, how I was driven, my own endeavors are driven by that. I think on top of that, you talked about universality just now. I think there's always that sense of universality when one wants to find out more about themselves, and one is driven to write themselves into being. And I found that, that's the universal kind of message that I think I'm also on that journey. So yeah.
Okay, Crispin, I'm going to throw you another question, and then we're going to move very nicely to our regulatory ethics lawyer, right? Because we're going to do ethics next. What are the ethics of representation that you felt have ever been something you've had to encounter in your practice as a poet, right? Have you felt that if you want to represent your own history as well as your community, are there any ethical considerations that frame your practice?
I think one of the problems that I face is often whether my perspective represents, especially a minority group, so they're kind of equating your own personal experience, but because there are so few representations of your group in the literary sphere, does your viewpoint account for an entire communities? And I find that very dangerous, so more often than not, when someone asks me, is your viewpoint a Eurasian viewpoint? I say, yeah, mine is one of many different Eurasian viewpoints. If you like to find out more about my community, read someone like Charlene Shepardson, read someone like Rex Shelley. Then after you've looked at all of these viewpoints, then you can decide for yourself whether my viewpoint is accurate or it's just a small subset. And I always frame that my viewpoint is really a small subset of my community and not the whole. So that's always the problem, right? Especially if there is a lack of representation in your community, that people tend to equate your viewpoint with the viewpoint of your community.
Yeah. Just like Rex Shelley when people were reading him all the time, right? Yep. Okay. Thank you so much. All right. So Aaron, okay. What about at the institutional level, right? And also the personal level for you as an artist and a community organizer. Do you have help us?
Des, I'm just going to blithely ignore your questions and if you just come right in and just say, first of all, that that phrase that you used, Crispin, write myself into representation. So well said. A wonderful phrase, and then the cautionary tone that you struck there, that, even as you're doing that very important personal exercise, of representing yourself by writing your way into that space or that community, you also caution us that, we are all unique individuals, personal histories, lived experiences. Does my own view account 100% for the rest of the community that I identify with? We really need to be very, very careful about saying that we do. I love that thought. I think it's a really important thought, and I think it is an ethical thought that you have expressed. So for myself, I think my journey into it, and is kind of a double-sided, if you like. Growing up in Malaysia, being in the racial minority, and also sort of growing up being aware of things like racial quotas in schools and other similar kind of thoughts, and then having my parents make that decision when I was 8 or 9 that the kids would study in Singapore, where there seemed to be a more egalitarian approach to education, even though it was probably going to be a very high pressure system, which I indeed found it to be. I think that sort of gave me that consciousness of being between two worlds, being between a rock and a hard place, and that is essentially the human condition for the rest of our lives, if we look at it. And as writers, as poets, and artists, we are in fact trying to make sense of our own life journey, of being between a rock and a hard place, So I think that's probably all I'm going to say about that. In terms of institutions, I'm going to start with place. As I and my family moved to Singapore from the sleepy town, Johor Bahru, I rapidly found that Singapore is a city. And it's not only a city, it's a city in the making. It is a city of cities. It is a place really where people come to kind of to thrive and prosper if they can, and also the kind of mixed bag of races, and Singapore is definitely a migrant society, means that there are people who are very, very different from one another, but are compelled to be in the crucible of the city because we are just in close quarters. So there's not even elbow room for one another sometimes. And in fact, that whole idea is actually what sparked the anthology that Alvin Pang and I put together, which became known as No Other City. We were fascinated by the idea of the city as being the crucible of human modernity. It's got diversity, it's got sameness, it's got needs, and it's got desires, it's got aspirations, it's got tragedies. And when we collected the poems written by many fellow Singaporeans and we put them, more than 100 of them, into the book, I just was blown away to the idea that there are so many of us and our stories are same and different at the same time. When you look at human geography as in this intimate, personal way that poetry presents itself, and also in the context of what we're all trying to do, we're trying to make a life. So there were ideas of placemaking, of transience, of demolition. Even our physical environment sort of are in the process of making and remaking and unmaking, private and common spaces, and then especially where aesthetic principles that are dear to writers and artists, autonomy, freedom of expression, they kind of collide with policy and utilitarian considerations by the lawmakers and the powers that be. That's very interesting, rich space for us to mine our art, and I know that my fellow panelists here have been doing that, and I've certainly been doing that, and there's so much more to explore in that space.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So it's so exciting, Aaron's work, and it's so nice when we hear from all of y'all share about your own projects, because we really see, say, like in anthologies, how much more can happen when so many, a multiplicity of voices are within one book. And then as we, sole author our own collections, right? Which does a lot of what Jolyn is doing, right? Okay, let's and just to promise everyone, who's listening to us, that we are going to get to hear actual poems from 3 of our distinguished poets towards the end, but we're going to also talk about the big sort of idea of wokeness, right? So my first question to the 3 panelists was, what is wokeness to you? And people have different understandings of this word. And what's your understanding of it, and has your own understanding of it changed over time? Let's hear from Jolyn again. Jolyn, what do you think?
First of all, I wanted us to have like an actual working definition of the word, or like an option for it. So I did go to search where the term originated from, because I had a feeling, but I wanted to confirm it. It originated from actually AAVE, African American Vernacular English. And the term woke was originally supposed to refer to someone who was alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. I think over time the term has definitely evolved, and now it has quite a fair bit of baggage, especially with the way people on the internet throw it around. I would still like to imagine that we are capable of understanding it as a term that refers to someone who is awake to or aware of the different conversations happening around social inequalities or social political issues at the moment. Yeah, so that's the term, the working definition of the term that I would very loosely sort of like to offer or put on the table. The baggage that I was referring to earlier, I think is very similar to the baggage that terms like cancel culture carry. A lot of people refer to wokeness with a tone that is almost snide. I think sometimes we fall into thinking that wokeness implies that someone is just following the trend of performing that sort of awareness in order to be part of like a more trendy social political landscape. I don't personally agree with that usage of it, but yeah.
Wow. Okay, we can see how robust the conversation is getting. Crispin, what do you think? Thank you so much for looking for the etymological root, Jolyn, and then bringing us to the trajectory of what the definition has become. Crispin, what do you think?
So, first of all, thanks to Jolyn for bringing up the origins of the term. Yeah, I think the first time I've heard the word woke, I guess would be something from Langston Hughes. You know, the idea of staying woke, and probably in African American authors that come after that. Some people like James Baldwin also use similar terminology. I often think of wokeness in a similar way that Jolyn has mentioned, but I also think that it's very much a grassroots level, because of obviously very much of this prejudice occurs at the institutional level, and I think lately when we think about wokeness, it's often coupled with social media usage and the idea that it's a groundswell of support, usually by some means of connecting each other. I think some things that we need to sort of move wokeness away from is that we often think that what comes after wokeness is canceling someone. So cancel culture comes after wokeness, but these two things are separate. Someone can be woke, but may not proceed after that with canceling someone. And I think that's an important differentiation that we need to make. So, essentially wokeness is just that awareness that comes from being, that heightened sense of being familiar with something, or being aware of mistreatment and inequality in society. So I think we need to know what exactly it is.
Thank you so much. Okay, and since you brought the idea of cancel culture into the discussion, what's your understanding of cancel culture, Crispin? And I know you've told us a bit about that, but do you have a different sense of what it's become as a phenomenon?
I think it depends. I mean, you have people who cancel other people because institutions of justice unable to carry out what people perceive as justice. So the grassroots again takes it on their stride to go and to cancel people. But you also have people who direct canceling, which is completely different from that notion of wokeness altogether. That's power at play. So I think it's different. It's that the way that cancel culture is used now. You have two almost different ways in which it operates, and I think we need to be aware of that.
Wow. Thank you so much, Crispin. Thank you. Okay, Aaron, wokeness, your understanding of it, please.
I'm loving the kind of the lines that Jolyn and Crispin have sort of taken a stick respectively and sort of draw some lines in the sand. I think that's really, really helpful for us. I'm loving it. This is a big topic. It's bigger than I originally thought, certainly. But it's current topic, and I think we ought to take the bull by the horns and sort of get into it. I think I also acknowledge when Jolyn you found the original sort of meaning of the origins of the term woke and wokeness. I also, what was not in the definition, but I think it's probably encompassed in there somehow. Understanding is that it does encompass the need for us to search for more knowledge, more understanding, and more truth, so that we can challenge injustice. And I think that's something that we shouldn't sort of forget. now that we've woken up to the social injustices around us, and we've seen how oppression has been institutionalized, how we are unable to unsee that, we can't go back to sleep again, then what do we do next? That's really, I think, where a lot of a lot of the problems may arise, because Jolyn, you talked about performative wokeness. That's something that's just so evident, especially on social media platforms, where we are living our life out loud 24/7, 365 on social media. I just want to mention, something that's probably more pertinent to my generation would be the idea of the similar concept to woke, perhaps, is the term red pill and blue pill, which kind of first came up or was popularized in the 1999 movie, The Matrix. Gosh, I mean, is that movie really that old? And I've heard people talking about it, and saying that, that there is a choice. When we asked to choose between the red pill and the blue pill, there is the choice between the willingness to learn something that's potentially very disturbing or unsettling or life-changing, by taking the red pill, or you could just live in contented ignorance with the blue pill. And so there's a kind of a path, a fork in the road, a crossroads that we are sort of confronted with. And I think that is the kind of thing that is the quality or the choice that is being presented when we come confronted with with wokeness. So I'm going to stop there and just kind of see, whether anyone has some thing to add.
Aaron, that's fabulous. Thank you so much. And the importance of learning more through knowledge and the pursuit of truth, right? So one of my struggles is that there's so much information coming through the interwebs all the time and social media that we never know what narrative we're getting and whether it's coming to the heart of the issue, right? And we've still got to interpret and form opinions about a certain concern. So how do we know at which point in time we are ready to have a response to even a phenomenon that's happening out there, say an injustice, right? So how do we interface with information even as it comes through? Let's hear from say Crispin. What do you think?
I'm just thinking about different levels of response. So obviously I can respond directly and immediately, and usually that's an emotional response. But there's also besides the individual, there's the collective response, and that takes time, and that takes time to also acknowledge what you're responding to, the way different people within a particular community might respond to. And I think it's very important to understand that sometimes what you may gain as a community at large is very different. It's going to be very different from your immediate response. And I think that's my take on it. So often when I see something that I disagree with on social media or on YouTube or wherever it is, of course I have my own personal response, and sometimes it does manifest itself differently. Perhaps maybe there is a response that I might have, directly, and this is a personal response that I might respond with art, with writing a poem about it. But at the same time, is that response going to be something that I might write a 1,000-word op-ed in the newspaper about, and it might be completely different. And the way that I'm looking at it retrospectively, maybe a week on, when I think about whether I should write an op-ed or not, will be completely different. But I think sometimes when we respond to when we respond to a particular event or issue, it's always what do we do with it? And sometimes it could be as simple as looking at it and then thinking to myself and not doing anything about it. It could be talking to a friend, it could be writing a poem, or it could be writing an op-ed a week from now. And I think that's very important to think about the medium and the medium and the immediacy of us responding to these events of injustice.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Do you think that there is a better response over another by your own choosing? Have you ever been made self-aware that, hey, I wish I had responded earlier with this latter response? I mean, have you ever found yourself suddenly sort of looking back on the sort of decisions that you've made?
I think I would say that as long as I'm able to take accountability of that moment and the way I'm responding at a particular moment, And we should take accountability, especially when we put something out there, like writing a response on social media, or even writing a poem in response to something that we've seen. I think that there's a need to take accountability of how you respond at a particular moment. Now, if I look at it a year on, I guess the same thing as, as artists here, we all write a poem that sometimes we are a bit embarrassed about, but we publish it and we still have to take accountability of it. And I think that's something that, I think all of us as artists are familiar with. The most important thing is accountability for the work that we've created.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, Topaz Winters once mentioned something very lovely. She said, what was true for me then was true for me then, and that doesn't change. It might have changed over time after 10 years, but it was still very true when she wrote it, right? For her. Jolyn, what do you think?
I think when Crispin was actually answering this question, talking about giving yourself time to respond or to think about how you might want to respond in the immediate moment versus maybe 1 week into the future or a few months into the future, I was also thinking about whether or not I have to have a response to it publicly. Because I think we were talking about performing a certain version of yourself, or at least we were bringing up ideas around that sort of performing wokeness or performing alertness or awakeness to social inequality or justice. And it's something that I will very freely admit that in my younger years, I struggled a lot with. I thought I had to have an opinion. And I mean, I'm like a millennial, so I grew up on the cusp of, I grew up on the internet. Like on MSN, when Twitter first started, I had a Twitter. I have a Twitter now. When Tumblr was the rage, I had a Tumblr blog. So I think I fell quite a ways into that trap of thinking that I had to have an opinion about everything, especially because that was the period where I was first learning about so many of these concepts, having grown up in a largely conservative Chinese Christian home. So for a period of time, I did feel like I needed to be out there. My voice needed to be loud. I needed to be speaking out about injustice. But I think the thing I've learned in the past really 3 to 5 years is that sometimes things don't require a response from me publicly. And my reaction to the situation, or the best reaction that I feel I can have for myself, that feels best for myself in my body, is to take care of the people around me who have been affected by whatever phenomenon people are speaking out about. So if it's a racial thing that has happened in Singapore, to check in on my friends and see if they need a space to sort of get into what they've been thinking, to pass their thoughts. Sometimes that space is not even with me, and that's fine, because it's like the issue is not about me. And I think acknowledging that is super important, because not all spaces are for us to occupy and take center stage in. And I think sometimes the best support you can offer is to be there actively trying to learn about what's happening and the ways that you can support your friends or the kind of support that they need. I think I've come to understand that as a person, my relationships with people are very important to me, and my relationships with my friends are very important to me. It's very important to me that I know how to support them, or that I understand how to hold the kind of space that they need. And therefore, that's been like the aftermath of a lot of issues that we've been talking about nowadays, is to sit and try to understand what my place in it is, or what role I have to play. Sometimes it's just a background supporting role, and that's fine, actually. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So there already the response is to build spaces, to hold spaces, and to care, and to have empathy, and to understand, right? That takes a very strong individual, right? So Jolyn, have you ever felt that at certain points in time, that modus operandi, that ethical response is something that you've ever felt that you weren't strong enough to be there for people, to offer that place of support, because there's so much sort of stuff coming through, right? Online, and you felt that you need to hold up, as an artist, to do your art. What do you think? How do we find that space?
It's a difficult question for me to answer, because this is not entirely related to my art or the way I do art. It's a lot of interpersonal relationships instead, and it's a lot of living life, I suppose. So I don't always feel the need to make art on moments like this, because I'm very conscious of my own privilege and the sort of position that I occupy. It's not always my position or my place to speak on such issues that have arisen, hence the turning to providing support or creating space instead. I think I'm sort of in a space right now with what I understand and what I've learned over the past few years, where I think that if there's any opinion to be expressed in such a hypothetical situation, it's probably better for me to pass the mic, especially when it comes to things like racial issues, for example, or issues on disability or mental health. And so it's important for me that I understand when to pass the mic, if ever it's given to me, or when to just support the people who are speaking. Yeah. So I don't tend to make art about things that are political in the current sense, only because they are not my topics to speak on, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Okay, Aaron.
Hey, that just makes so much sense. I was just listening and just so inspired and amazed. Jolyn, what you shared is really just a bunch of wisdom. That I think we all would, as practicing writers, would do well to really, really think carefully about, and then to adopt some of these practices. I like what you said. You used to think that you had to have an opinion on everything and then share it, but then as you got wiser, you kind of like, no, that's not really. And your first priority, I'm just so amazed. What you've expressed, your first responsibility is to take care of, to hold space, to sit with the people in your circle that are most affected by whatever has just happened. And making art about that event is frankly not high on your priority. And I just say bravo to that. That takes a really strong person. It takes a person who really, as an artist, put your ego one side. You don't have to always have the megaphone or the mic all the time. That's just so exemplary. To that, I just want to balance also by saying that, because an artist is placed in a certain way and has the gifts, to kind of to make art, then an artist ought to think about responding with his or her art, because that's your response that's going to be unique to you, and you can do things that differently. So I think considering medium of response is important. I think Crispin used that term, medium and immediacy, and accountability. Take responsibility for it. And I think I'm seeing I'm not that active on social media, but I do see that there is a kind of several camps of people who will not give you an inch. The moment something you say a word that's out of place, or even a tone or what is unsaid that you ought to have said, the knives will come out, And then there are other people who will appreciate your honesty, your transparency, and then they will say, that's fine, that's what you've just owned is really something that is so important to them, and then they sort of like I find that a lot of the cultural wars that go on in social media and cyberspace are conducted by people for whom the ego is really the kind of the bedrock of all they say and do. And for me personally, then I would just avoid and shy away from those fora. It doesn't make sense for me to kind of get involved.
Okay. No, thank you so much, Aaron. So here's the thing. Yes, so there is the culture of offense, right? How some people can be so easily offended by even, just easily offended. So what's very important then is how do we as artists retain our mental health, good mental health, right? In a world where the messaging can be so diverse, and there can be people who love what you've said, as well as people who suddenly take offense. So could you share some tips with other, say, writers out there about how we can, hold our own space and be self-aware and yet be healthy while continuing our art, right? Why don't we hear from Crispin again?
So one of the things that I don't know, I've been trying to do over the last couple of years is to, I wouldn't say seclude myself, but, find a space of my own. And actually, one of the things that because I'm a millennial like Jolyn, and one of the things that I remember was that I started using Facebook. I think that was 2004. That was the first year I started using Facebook. And the funny thing about it is that over the last 6 months, I've been actually really, it sounds so weird. I don't know why, but I've really been contemplating deleting my Facebook account, and that's the thing that I've been trying to do. And one of the things that but then there are all these things that are on my head. Oh, I've like all these years of memories of these photos, and so the funny thing is that I've been sort of debating how can I move away from all this noise by just deleting the thing that creates the noise in the first place. So yeah, so actually one of the things that I've done is that I've just straight up not like responded to anybody or not responded to any kind of post. The only thing I do and I use social media for is to send book reviews, so happy vibes for everyone rather than just I'm going to comment. But it doesn't mean that I'm not there, I'm not listening. And sometimes I do listen. I keep the comments to myself for now, and that's really what I'm trying to do, find my own space. And it's still something that I'm tossing and turning around. Like there's some days where I move to delete entire account altogether, and then they prompt you yes or no, right? And then for now I just press no, but I completely delete all ways to access social media.
Wow. Thank you. Okay, let's hear from Jolyn.
I have now forgotten what the question was, so I'm going to sort of engage with what Crispin was saying and say that I have had the same urges to remove my social media accounts. I don't think we were meant to be online all the time, being flooded with this barrage of information left, right, and center, with all the opinions to grapple with. I think that the internet and digital spaces are very useful tools to engage with people and to reach people from inside the safety and like physical comfort of your own home, and therefore useful for building reaffirming spaces for people who might just be learning about all these new social political aspects. I think new because for young people, they're very often very new. That was where I first encountered a lot of this information also. It's where you first find the language to talk about the hurt that you've experienced, the things that you've gone through. So it's a very empowering, digital spaces are very empowering for that. I think the key is moderation. So there have been a few, I remember the question is now, I think there are a few things that are important to remember for me personally when talking about dealing with or engaging with such kinds of spaces online. That was the first thing to remember, that everything is in moderation. Sometimes you just need to step away from the computer and engage with people in real life and prioritize and build relationships in real life, which is what I've been trying to do over the past few years. I think the second thing to remember is that being silenced or being personally attacked is something that we need to differentiate or be able to pick apart from being held accountable, because none of us are exempt from saying things occasionally that are hurtful to people, that are not compassionate, that might be ignorant just because we don't know or haven't learned about why these things are not okay to say, or why certain ideas are not okay to perpetuate, or the language that we hold around them, because often the discussions going on around contentious topics require a very specific kind of language, or people use language to tell if you are aligned with them or not. I'm talking about things like down to the vocabulary that you use and stuff like that. And it's not uncalled for that they use language to be able to tell whether or not you're an ally, because language is very telling of the things that you think and the implications that are behind your words. But we are all prone to sometimes slipping up in those areas just because we don't know enough. And therefore being held accountable for something that you said, or somebody telling you something like, hey, it's not okay to say that actually, because this is the current understanding of it that a lot of people hold, and this is the effect that your words will have. That needs to be separated from someone attacking or calling you out for the sake of silencing you. Because I think a lot of the discourse around cancel culture now, which we brought up earlier as well, is the idea that people are just cancelling each other left, right, center for nothing. And while I don't deny that that can happen on the more extreme ends of the spectrum, I think it's important for us as individuals also to realize that sometimes people are not trying to cancel you. They're trying to hold you accountable for hurtful things that you said. And it's important to be like, I see now and I didn't know before, and I'm sorry. Because sometimes that's what's important, especially when you're talking about taking care of people and making space for them and building relationships with them. So I think that's been the second thing that's very important to me, to remember to distinguish between being cancelled or being personally attacked versus being held accountable and responding to it well. The third thing that I think has been very important and this is in no way an exhaustive list, because I don't have an exhaustive list. The third thing that has been very important for me to learn and subsequently remember is that people have a right to their anger, especially communities of people who have been discriminated against, who have been hurt, and who have been systemically oppressed or beaten down their entire lives, and whose lives are fundamentally a different experience from someone like mine. And I hold like an immense amount of privilege as a cis Chinese woman in this society. People have a right to their anger, and this translates into saying that sometimes when people call you out, there is a lot of anger, but it's not directed at you as a personal attack, and it's very much an anger that is born from everything that they've experienced from the system. And you have to allow them their anger, because in their position you would be angry too, and allowing someone their anger is very much a big part of being empathetic. So for me, that has played into being able to separate when I am being held accountable for something, and then acknowledging the hurt and apologizing subsequently. Yeah. That's not been articulated in the most detailed form, but I don't want to like go on and on about it. So that's just about the most important things to me that I can think of at the moment.
Those are brilliant.
Yeah.
I want to throw in something before we go to Aaron. What happens when we've seen this before, where the sorry isn't enough, Jolyn? What happens? We see that so much, right? When people suddenly realize, oh no, it was a wrong, and then they say sorry, but social media has just made it this huge scandal, and there's no coming back from it. Jolyn, how would you view something like this?
I think two responses to that. I don't, of course, have all the answers for how to deal with it, because I'm very much still learning, and I might still be wrong or find that my views have changed a few weeks from now. But sometimes it's true, like saying sorry is not enough because you did cause a hurt or you did do the bad thing, for example. I think it's important to express that you know that if you are in that position, that you know that you've caused hurt. And if I were in that position, it would be important for me to express that I know and am aware of the behavior that caused it, and therefore apologize for it. And after that, when I guess the outrage is still going on and people are still talking about it, there's not more that you have to say about it. Like, you can just leave it at the sorry. It's okay. Because like, if you've done a bad thing, and I'm speaking from imagining that I've done the bad thing that people are outraged about, yes, it's going to be super uncomfortable to sit with the blowback, even after I've said sorry. And it's going to be super uncomfortable to sit with people still talking about it. But these things are important to talk about and call out. And I am not owed forgiveness just because I've apologized. So to me, the things I've tried to focus on are apologizing and actively trying to change the behavior if I agree that it's wrong, and actively trying to repair things that way. But the burden is not on the person who has been hurt to teach you how to change or to forgive you. Yeah. But on the other side of things, I think, I do think that, I'm not saying that call outs are okay no matter what form they take. I do think that if we are on the other side of the equation and calling people out and asking for accountability, we can do so with much more compassion and much more empathy, much more willingness to, if we have the capacity and space for it, to sit down and speak to the person who's hurt us. I think I've wanted for some time to bring things back down to the level of interpersonal relationships, in the sense that I don't think everything needs to be on an internet or digital public platform, unless it's something that's really institutional and has been a repeated pattern. I think if it's just you and somebody else, then just sit down with the person and explain to them what's gone wrong. There is so much more room for nuance when you are talking person to person, rather than when you're trying to spread big messages on platforms. So going back to the idea that the medium and the format of delivery of this accountability call for accountability, that's always really important, because you want to think about the people involved, I think, or I would want to think about the people involved and what level it needs to be on. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jolyn. Okay, Aaron, sorry for hijacking it from just now. Aaron, come. Give us your words of wisdom.
Not at all. I'm just kind of just mulling over what's been shared, Jolyn, and your question, and Crispin. I'll just connect backwards in the last things that were said, and I must agree with Jolyn that it's a bit too much it would be too much for us to expect that when we're given an apology into cyberspace and apologizing to the world at large, and then hoping against hope that they will, to the very last person, express their acceptance and forgiveness. That's a little bit too much to expect. People have a right to their anger, because the anger is something that they will have to deal with, and some of it has to do with you and what you've said or done, and some of it has to do with their own stuff that's going on in their own life. So yeah, it tells me, therefore, that really making, the public aspect of social media probably is something that's so important, so even when it comes to being held accountable versus being cancelled, I do see that the key difference is whether it's done publicly, because shame comes into the picture as soon as it's public. The rebuke or the commentary or the critique is done publicly, and then when that happens, people will just dig in. For the sake of not losing face, they will just dig into their positions, even if they personally feel shaken and hurt. So that's just something that I'm just thinking about now as a result of what was shared. So thanks for that.
No, and so I mean, we've got to listen to the poems, but so many important points, and we could stretch this for hours on end. But so many things about what culture can be and what good culture can be, right? Whether there can be more culture of forgiveness, mercy, compassion that was brought up, of love, even as there is the importance of speaking up for injustices that have been leveled against persons or communities. So it's so important. I think it's sort of that balance of how much good culture can be out there, right, to create a good space for everyone, and that's really tough to do. But let's spend the last couple of minutes hearing from our distinguished poets a poem from each of them that says something about what was important to them at the point in time when they wrote it or published it. Okay, so let's start with Aaron. Okay, and then we'll go backwards.
Yeah, I was just you asked us to prepare a poem or two to read or to share, and I was trying to think, do I have any woke poems or and I don't know, to be honest, but the best I could come up with was really this piece from my second book. The title of the poem is "The Life of the Party Tells All." I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's really about a obnoxious persona in the poem, and it was not only printed in the book, but some years later, 2017, I think, it was actually performed at Note for Note at the invitation of Mark Nair, and I had the pleasure to inhabit or to role play this obnoxious persona on the stage, accompanied by my good friend Yong Kai Lin. He's a fiddler for peace. He's a wonderful violinist. He improvised musical accompaniment that was just every bit as obnoxious as the persona that I was kind of portrayed. But I hope there's some sort of poignancy as well to it, because I think one of the things about being woke is really that wokeness at its worst really is not just about being alert to injustice wherever it exists, and advocating for it to change. But at its worst, it can turn human beings against one another. It results in people being judged by, whatever differences that we perceive, real or not, rather than by the content of their character and what they do. So I'm going to stop there and maybe just read a bit of this poem. The life of the party tells all. Why, being so good looking and full of EQ, I nominated me for the part. And thus I came to flit amidst this profusion of champagne and soft laughter. And it falls upon me to be the one holding you all in this room, wrapped with wonder and enlightenment. Under the sporadic light, I am everyone's friend, blithe and free. And at the other end of this ballroom, I am a sculpted dispenser of dazzling drinks and sage advice. I know every move of the market before it happens, and though we've just met, I will share my wisdom with you. Well, just yesterday, the orphanage called with another emergency, so I gave them a song to transport those crippled children from their brooding bed depths to another world. I bought them the brightest toys. I made them laugh endlessly and played puppet with nothing more than my hand and a paper bag. And afterwards, I kissed the head nurse. I took out the trash, along with all the shards of diminished hope that they had surrendered. Well, so they crowded the window, waving goodbye with smiles that will take years to fade. It gives me so much satisfaction to do good. Well, let's come back to you, such fascinating company. How do you like that concoction I mixed? I learned it from a bartender in Ibiza, who's a lovely man and so gay, but it's got my special touch. You, my friends, are drinking the last spirits of a blazing world and the embers of the next to come. So that's all I'm going to tell you. I have another gathering to go to, so regrettably, I'm going to leave. I am the shape of everything into which I have been poured. The room behind me empties, and I'm filled to the brim with it where I go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Lovely, lovely. And that's the beauty of poetry. It allows us to take on personae and to perform, right? Okay. Crispin, let's hear from you. Can we have a poem from Crispin?
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to read an unpublished poem that in the manuscript that I'm currently working on. The one thing that this particular manuscript that I'm quite interested in is that I'm very interested when people use certain lingo and then they use it as a way to exclude, but they don't want to take offense. So one of the most common terms that people like to use, right, is they like to say, "Oh, no offense," and then they proceed to make offense against you. So so this is a poem that uses something similar. So it uses the term "depending on." So I guess it's the closest, one of the many poems that I tried to deal with wokeness here. So this is a poem, it's a prose poem called "Depending on." Depending on. Depending on when we begin, depending on where we begin, depending on who we begin with, depending on who was in power then, depending on the movement of the wind, depending on the season, depending on who's first, depending on pre-existing norms, depending on who has the larger army, depending on color, depending on who pays the tax, depending on organizational outcomes, depending on the circumstance, depending on stability, depending on your mood, depending on your color blindness, depending on what questions you ask the immigration guy next to you, depending on the minutes till your lunch, depending on your spouse, depending on your children, depending on your gods, depending on our threat, depending on you, pending you, pending, ending. Yep, that's it.
Wow. And pending your fourth collection, that's where this unpublished poem is going to go into, isn't it?
Love it, Crispin, love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, lovely work from Crispin and Aaron. Thank you so much, Crispin. Okay, Jolyn, it's all yours. The stage is yours.
I am not reading a poem on wokeness because I don't think I've written a poem on wokeness. But I have been working on like several collections and things for a while. And I wanted to shout out the collection that this poem is sitting in. It's actually an art book. I wrote it in collaboration with an art book called On Holding Space, which is produced by one of my friends who runs a website called Objects Lessons Space. And the art book is a meditation on, I don't know if you can see it because I think I have my background blurred out. But it's a meditation on what it means to build relationships and hold space for each other in art communities, and the kind of practices that we want to do and inform. The poem itself that I wrote for this was sort of me thinking about what it means to love people by building space for them or by making space for them in your life and in your relationships. It's entitled Personal Myth. The story you wanted to tell starts here. What follows does not move in a straight line like a river spreading backwards into tributaries or a tree going in search of water, putting out roots to drink from. It hovers in the air, a 3D printed, thread-thin spiderweb thing, lines studded with dew and pockets of space. Maybe in the woods you come across it built for you and poke your fingers into the gaps. They too are part of the web. 10 steps behind you, they tread into the same spot from a different path and get close enough for their exhales to rock the whisper of filaments, a breeze as they breathe. Maybe love is in the footsteps, lingering in the air passed through, shimmering in each cell that wafts off your skin. Love is in the blank solitude, the understanding that people walking through the same spaces pass through each other, like ghosts, like fog, like warm steam from fresh coffee. Love is the breath you take, knowing that at some point in time, exact and true, so do they.
Lovely, lovely, and definitely the last word on things, love, right? Love will save the day for all of us. But thank you so much for these brilliant poems. I'm just gonna one more from all three of you. Last words to every poet out there who's just trying to survive, right? Do you have anything to say to all the writers out there, young and old, who are trying to live and do our work, right? Okay, let's hear from Aaron. What do you think?
All I can say is this, in the context of the topic that we've been exploring today, wokeness, and poetry, is to really maybe spend less time on social media, and really we are all human beings, and so we are multifaceted, we are embodied, we are body, mind, and spirit. We are walking, breathing bundles of contradictions. And we can't even live out 10% of what we claim to be our deepest convictions and values consistently. And so we have being on the social media too much or being in cyberspace too much, it's just going to result in us having a kind of imposter syndrome, where there's a kind of, the masks are always on and there's no breathing room just to be ourselves, without those masks on. And really, I mean, for me, it's just so important to nurture our offline selves, with whatever makes you happy, right? Whether it's just being in nature or being with a loved one or having a meal by yourself even, and I think that's just so important, kind of self-care. And art is, what the writer said, right? Life is short, but art is long. And just take the long view and be wise. I think, as Jolyn said, we don't have to have an opinion on everything and share it with the world. I mean, it really doesn't make a difference in the end. But we take care of ourselves, we take care of those who are closest to us. Yeah.
Lovely, Aaron. Always generous. Thank you so much, Aaron. Okay, Crispin.
I think writing on what Aaron mentioned, I think, especially the last 2 years, if you think about what COVID's done to everyone, it's really shaken up everyone's lives. And I think the most important message is care. If poetry is care, write poetry. If caring for your friends is care, then care for them. If going and telling someone I love you and I care for you is care, then express that. So I think it's very important at this particular point in our lives, and especially what the last 2 years has really shown us. Just go out and express care.
Yet another generous comment from our second speaker. Okay, Jolyn, you've got the last word on this.
I was going to echo that and say that I would like us to be able to imagine and put into action communities in which we take care of each other, first and foremost, as human beings. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm so glad we ended on this very generous, compassionate note, everybody. It's a beautiful end note, which is a top note for me. So I would really just like to thank our very distinguished, eminent poets for sharing their wisdom with all of us of their own lived experience, as well as, pearls of advice for all of us. Thank you, everybody. And please go watch all the other amazing events at Poetry Festival Singapore, which is itself, a beautiful space where spaces are created to build communities and bridges amongst different people. Okay, so thank you so much, Jolyn Tan, Crispin Rodriguez, and Aaron Lee, our wonderful poets of all time who are going to be here talking to us and sharing all their experiences for a very long time to come. Okay, everybody, have a beautiful,
Lots of love to you, especially Desmond. Thank you for just steering this discussion, which is kind of fraught. I just thought that, confess and say, I thought it might come in like that, but you've done it so well. And I'm just so happy at all the insights and all the love that's been shown. Love you guys all. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes. Love all of you. All right. Have a beautiful, beautiful weekend. Okay.
You too.
Take care.
Bye, everyone. See you soon.
Yes.
See ya, bye.
See you.